"I told you I don't like this food," I said, my frustration clear. "You're harassing me by making things I don't enjoy, aren't you?" I added, feeling overwhelmed. "But your husband likes it," she replied dismissively. "Just cook something else right now," I insisted, my patience wearing thin. I had reached my breaking point. The constant yelling and screaming from my mother-in-law when she didn't like something had become unbearable. I wasn't sure if I could handle her sarcasm and criticism for the rest of my life. I had resigned myself to enduring her bullying, but then something happened that changed everything. "My name is Ellen. My husband George and I have been married for 3 years, and we were living with my parents at their house. George, often away on business trips, was currently gone, and though I used to feel uneasy without him, had become so busy that I barely noticed his absence. My days were packed from dawn until dusk. I would wake up early to prepare a meal for my father-in-law, who rose with the sun. While he ate, I would clean the house and do the laundry. After he finished, I'd immediately clean up the dishes. Once the household chores were done, I'd rush to my part-time job. When I got home at 5 p.m., I'd cook dinner again, clean the house, and do laundry one more time. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. But the most draining part of my life was the constant bullying from my mother-in-law. Although she didn't work and spent all her time at home, she did no housework. My husband once told me he couldn't even remember what his mother's cooking tasted like, indicating she hadn't done much housework when he was growing up. Despite her inactivity, my mother-in-law had a knack for criticizing everything I did. She was meticulous about the food I prepared and always found fault with the cleanliness of the house. It felt like her hobby to belittle me. Known in the neighborhood as a show-off, she would parade around in ill-fitting jewelry, and though the neighbors would compliment her, they didn't genuinely think she looked good. They were hesitant to upset her, perhaps out of respect for my father-in-law, who was well-liked and involved in the community. He had been an executive at a prominent local company and was still connected with many people from his professional life. Though my father-in-law never imposed his will, my mother-in-law's overbearing nature was often overlooked by the neighbors, who chose not to confront her. Feeling isolated, I had no one to turn to in the neighborhood. However, when my father-in-law fell ill and was diagnosed with advanced cancer, my world shifted. I was grateful for him, who was the complete opposite of my mother-in-law. Despite his illness, his kindness and genuine concern for me stood out starkly against the backdrop of my mother-in-law's cruelty. I knew that our financial stability was largely thanks to my father-in-law's past contributions. To show my gratitude, I tried to take care of him as best as I could. I made sure to keep him engaged with conversations, played cards with him, and prepared easy-to-eat meals to ensure he received the nutrition he needed. He was always appreciative and often expressed his thanks. "Thank you," he would say. "I'm so happy every day because of you." No, I would respond. "I'm just doing what I can." "I'm sorry for the burden my wife has put on you," he would continue. "She doesn't do much around the house." It was clear that my father-in-law was concerned about my mother-in-law's lack of effort. His gentle nature made it hard for him to address her shortcomings directly. Still, it was comforting to know he understood how poorly she treated me. "I'm sorry for leaving everything to you, Ellen," he said. "My wife should be doing a better job. You don't have to force yourself to take care of me." "Please don't say that," I reassured him. "I just want to repay you for everything you've done for me." His eyes welled up with tears as he held my hand and said, "Thank you." But then everything changed. My father-in-law's condition suddenly deteriorated, and he was rushed to the hospital in an emergency. When the ambulance arrived, he was already in a coma. The doctors informed us that his prognosis was uncertain and that we needed to prepare ourselves for the worst. The sudden turn of events left me in a state of panic, struggling to process the gravity of the situation. I couldn't stop crying when I saw my father-in-law, his face etched with pain. I felt a pang of sympathy for my mother-in-law, believing she must be deeply distressed. I asked her how she was coping. However, her response was chillingly unexpected. "I'm sure he'll never recover from this, but at least his inheritance will be enough," she said, her words cold and calculating. Her callousness enraged me. Meanwhile, my father-in-law remained unconscious, though his breathing was steady. I visited him daily, speaking to him as much as I could, hoping that somehow my words might reach him and prompt a response. Yet he showed no signs of waking. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, never came to see him. When I encouraged her to visit, she would respond dismissively. "Don't tell me what to do. I'm too busy every day. Spending time at the hospital is a waste." Whenever I tried to persuade her, she would lash out with harsh comments. She even had the audacity to instruct me, "Hey Ellen, you're bringing clean clothes for him every day, right? Just pretend I did it. Don't make the mistake of saying you did." Her intention was clear. She wanted to appear benevolent while avoiding any actual responsibility. "He'll never wake up, and his inheritance will be mine," she declared. "Don't talk nonsense to people about it." It was evident that my mother-in-law's sole concern was the inheritance, revealing just how little she cared about my father-in-law's well-being. I was so infuriated by my mother-in-law's selfishness that I decided I had to take action. With my father-in-law no longer at home, her bullying had intensified. "Why aren't you starting dinner yet? It's too early for that," she snapped. "I'm heading to the hospital now and will be back soon to cook." "You really piss me off, Ellen," she continued. "I've told you countless times that the old man is only good for leaving me his money. He doesn't need visits or sympathy." Her harsh words about my father-in-law were too much to bear. I wanted to retort but managed to keep my composure. Then I received a call from the hospital with the news I had been hoping for. "Is it true?" asked, heart racing. Thank God. My father-in-law had finally emerged from his coma, and remarkably, his condition had stabilized. I rushed to the hospital with my mother-in-law. As we entered his room, I greeted him warmly. "Welcome back. It's so good to see you." He responded, "Me too. I'm sorry for all the trouble." My father-in-law smiled peacefully at me. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, put on an act of joy and said, "Honey, I've been taking care of you every day." "I see," he replied, noting that his clothes were clean. "You did all this for me?" "Yes, I did everything," she said, looking at me expectantly, as if she wanted me to agree with her performance. Ignored her silent cues and let her leave. It was clear from her expression that she was frustrated with me for not playing along. My father-in-law noticed her irritation, but chose not to comment. "Well, I'm going to go now," my mother-in-law said, her mood sour. "I have some errands to run, so please take care of things here, Ellen." She cast one last annoyed glance at my father-in-law before leaving the room. "Are you okay, Ellen?" he asked, noticing the tension. "Why do you ask?" I responded, puzzled. "My wife's attitude seemed strange," he said. "I thought it was you who took care of me all this time." I realized that he had seen through the pretense. Had been keeping evidence of my mother-in-law's actions, planning to share it when the time was right. I hadn't expected to reveal it so soon. "Well, I'm sorry if this disturbs you," I said, pulling out my voice recorder. "But please listen to this." I played the recording for him, feeling a mix of guilt and relief as he heard my mother-in-law's true voice. I knew my father-in-law would find it painful to hear everything my mother-in-law had said on the recording. Her words were filled with malice and greed. "When my husband dies, I want all the inheritance for myself. I want him to die soon. I don't want to take care of him. It's a waste of time." As I looked at my father-in-law with concern, I was surprised to see him laughing. "She's turned into such a greedy woman, hasn't she?" he said with a chuckle. "I wouldn't give any of my inheritance to someone like that." Despite his laughter, I could sense his deep anger and hurt. A few days later, my father-in-law's condition stabilized, and he was discharged from the hospital. Once home, my mother-in-law made a point of telling him how difficult it had been to care for him every day. My father-in-law listened in silence, not disputing her complaints. Shortly after, my husband returned from his business trip to visit his father. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said as he arrived, "but it's good to see you're doing okay." "Yes, I'm fine," my father-in-law replied. "Thanks to you and Ellen for looking out for me. I'm really glad you're here." My father-in-law seemed genuinely grateful for our support. From then on, my husband and I continued to care for him. Although he made some progress, his health remained fragile. I could see my father-in-law growing weaker each day. The reality of his approaching farewell was becoming clear. My husband and I made a pact to do our utmost for him until we had to say goodbye. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law remained unchanged. She continued to neglect my father-in-law's care, spending her time away from home. It seemed she believed that with my husband's return, she could relax and let us handle everything. The fact that both my father-in-law and husband were home made it harder for her to assert her dominance over me. As my father-in-law's condition deteriorated, he ate less and less. In his final moments, he managed to whisper his last words to us. "Thank you both so much. I've left a will for you to read after I'm gone. I appreciate your care until the end." With those words, his life came to an end. At his funeral, I was deeply moved by the sheer number of people who came to pay their respects. It was clear that my father-in-law had been greatly respected at work and cherished by many. In contrast, my mother-in-law seemed unnervingly lively. She acted as though she was the one who had brought everyone together, and even boasted about taking care of him until the very end. Her lack of tears and her disingenuous display of grief were unsettling. I wanted to confront her about her behavior in front of the attendees, but I refrained from causing a scene at my father-in-law's grave. The funeral went smoothly, and I was relieved that my father-in-law could rest in peace. However, when we returned home, I noticed a drastic shift in my mother-in-law's attitude. My mother-in-law's attitude changed drastically after the funeral. She was visibly exhausted and spoke with a mix of relief and satisfaction. "I'm so tired. Funerals are always so depressing," she said. "But now that I have the inheritance, I can look forward to the rest of my life." It was clear she believed that all of my father-in-law's inheritance was rightfully hers. She seemed in high spirits, making plans for her newfound wealth. That's when my husband presented her with the will. "I'm sorry to change the mood," he said, "but Dad left this will before he passed. I haven't read it yet, but I think it has something to do with the inheritance." "Don't need to see the will. It's all mine," she replied confidently. "Let's just sit down and read it," my husband suggested, trying to calm the situation. When my husband carefully opened the will, my mother-in-law grabbed the paper roughly and began to read. Her expression shifted from confidence to shock as she read the contents. What is this?" she stammered, her face going pale. I took the will from her trembling hands and read it myself. It stated that I was to inherit everything my father-in-law had. It also mentioned that the inheritance was to be used by both me and George as a couple, acknowledging my care for him while my husband was away. This made perfect sense. My father-in-law's gratitude was evident in his will. "But all of it," my mother-in-law protested, her voice rising in outrage. "This isn't right. How can two strangers get everything?" She accused me of forging the will and made vicious remarks, calling me names and claiming that I must have manipulated my father-in-law. "Hey Mom, stop," my husband finally said, his anger rising. "You've never taken care of Dad. Ellen did. That's why he was so grateful to her." My mother-in-law, now hysterical, began to cry uncontrollably. "Please, please, at least leave me the house." I felt a pang of sympathy for my mother-in-law, knowing how hard it must be to lose the home she had lived in for so long. To ease her distress, I decided to offer her a small portion of my inheritance. "You can keep the house," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "I understand you're struggling financially, so I'll give you some money as well. But please, don't act like you did before. We're moving out and you'll need to manage on your own. Her reaction shifted dramatically once she learned she would be receiving both the house and some money. Oh, thank God. I was afraid I'd lose the house too, she exclaimed, her mood lightening. If you're leaving, then get out already. With that, she returned to her old, unpleasant self. I was frustrated by how easily I had been manipulated by her false tears, but the thought of no longer living with her outweighed my irritation over the portion of the inheritance I was giving away. A week later, we began our move. We planned to temporarily live in an apartment while searching for a suitable location to build a new house. Thanks to the inheritance from my father-in-law, we would be able to construct a beautiful home. I also wanted to build a small altar in his honor to show my gratitude. I was thrilled at the prospect of a new chapter free from the constant scrutiny of my mother-in-law. On the other hand, she struggled to adjust to her new circumstances. Despite losing her primary residence, she continued her lavish spending habits, living beyond her means. As word of our departure spread, the neighborhood's attitude toward my mother-in-law shifted. The neighbors, once wary of her, began spreading rumors, further isolating her. Her extravagant lifestyle eventually depleted her savings and pension. She had to sell the house she had fought so hard to keep, and now, with no home or job, her current situation is unknown to me. As far as I'm concerned, she is no longer my concern. I have no interest in where she goes or what she does from now on.
Who could have imagined that when I brought my baby for her 3-month checkup, I would find my husband holding someone else's child? What are you doing here? Just then, the baby's mother showed up and the situation worsened. My husband didn't even seem remorseful, but in the next moment, an unimaginable truth was revealed. My name is Kate Sutherland, and I just turned 34. I'm a stay-at-home mom. My husband David is 36, 2 years older than me. We're a pretty ordinary family, a stay-at-home wife and a working husband. I was incredibly happy with our life together. Or so I thought. I've come to realize that what I thought was my ideal family was just an illusion. Getting to this point hasn't been easy. I have an older sister named Sarah, who is also 36, the same age as David. Growing up, Sarah was like a celebrity. She stood out, always attracting attention. My grandmother was from Northern Europe, and Sarah inherited her striking features. With her light-colored eyes and hair that shimmered red in the sunlight, Sarah always seemed a little different from the rest of us. She didn't dye her hair or wear colored contacts. It was all natural, and many men were drawn to her. Every guy I dated ended up falling for Sarah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to take your boyfriend again, Kate. But what can I do? They always fall for me. Don't take it personally.
Despite her innocent appearance, Sarah had a dark side. She had no shame about taking my boyfriends, and she did it over and over. Most of those relationships only lasted a month or so.
I don't know why you could date a guy like that. Can you believe he wanted to split the bill on our date?
She would dump them easily, and no matter how much it hurt me, nothing ever seemed to faze her. My parents tried to rein her in. They would tell her to consider my feelings, but it never got through.
Kate, do you know the phrase survival of the fittest? The world works that way. If you were stronger or more determined to hold on to what's yours, I wouldn't have been able to take it from you. It's your fault.
My parents eventually gave up trying to discipline her. Growing up in that environment made me determined to create a fair and loving family of my own when I got married. I decided I only wanted one child, so I could give them all the love and attention they deserved. Once I was out in the world, I minimized my contact with Sarah as much as possible. I met David in my late 20s, and after dating seriously for a while, we got married. Now I'm pregnant, and the little life inside me is growing strong. I thought that our future would be filled with happiness. The first few months of pregnancy were tough. I suffered from morning sickness and lost a lot of weight. Still, I wanted to break the news to my parents in person. I made sure to go back home on a day when Sarah wouldn't be there, as she still lived with my parents. Sarah had married a rebellious-looking guy in her early 20s, but they divorced after 3 months. Since then, she's been living at our parents' home for nearly 10 years. My parents were happy for me to come back and break the news to them.
Mom, Dad, I'm pregnant.
I don't know how well I'll do, but I'm going to love this baby with everything I have." My parents' eyes filled with tears, overjoyed at the news of becoming grandparents. Despite everything we've been through, they were always there for me, especially when Sarah gave me trouble. I was so happy I could share this news with them while they were still healthy. But as I left their house, I ran into someone I definitely didn't want to see. "What are you doing here?" The sky grew heavy with clouds, and rain started to fall, dampening everything around us. Sarah stood there with a smirk on her face.
Oh, are you here to announce your pregnancy? I'm good at picking up on these things, you know. Well, congrats!
The rain fell harder, but the tension between us was even heavier. "This has nothing to do with you, Sarah." My voice was low, but Sarah didn't flinch.
No need to glare at me like that. I'm not going to steal your baby, okay?
Sarah brushed past me and went into the house. Sarah had always hated the rain, so she probably canceled whatever plans she had. That's just how she is, moving through life on whims and dragging everyone else along. Unlike a cat who can be whimsical without being bothersome, Sarah's whims always caused trouble. A few months later, I was nearing my due date and feeling a bit nervous.
"I'll be home late again today, but if anything happens, make sure to go to the hospital."
"Okay, be safe." Lately, David's been working late and going out for drinks with his colleagues. Sometimes he doesn't come home until the early morning or even stays out all night. You think he'd be more concerned, considering I'm about to give birth any day now. And every time he comes home, I smell unfamiliar perfume on him. I don't mind perfume in general, but smelling another woman's scent on my husband is a different story.
"It's from one of the bar hostesses. We go out drinking to build connections. It's for work."
David's a public servant, so it's not like he needs to butter people up. But he's in competition with his peers, and attending these gatherings gives him an advantage for promotions. If he can get promoted to supervisor, his salary will increase significantly, which would help support our growing family. So, I tolerated it. But did he really need to go out drinking this often to secure his promotion?
"Hey, Kate, get me some water."
It was just after midnight when David came stumbling into the bedroom, waking me up. If he had the energy to wake me up for water, he could have easily gotten it himself. But I went and got it for him anyway, because deep down, I was still in love with him. I just hoped that love wouldn't run dry. 4 days before my due date, I woke up feeling like something was wrong. "I think my water just broke." I immediately called David, who was at a work party.
"I've been drinking, so I can't drive. Just call a cab or something."
And with that, he hung up. I was left staring at my phone in disbelief, the dial tone ringing in my ear. Most husbands would rush home in this situation, but not David. I started to cry, my hands shaking as I scrolled through my phone to call my parents. Before I could dial, my sister-in-law Emma answered.
Kate? What's going on? Why are you calling this late?
I don't know what to do.
Wait, you're pregnant, right? Is it time?
My brother's probably out drinking again, isn't he?
I'll be there in a few minutes. Hang tight.
A few minutes later, Emma pulled up in her big SUV.
I've got clean towels back here. Use them if you need to.
Emma's mom got out of the passenger seat and helped me into the car. She held my hand the entire drive to the hospital. Within 2 hours, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I never imagined that it wouldn't be my husband, but my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, Emma and Lily, who would be there to support me. They hesitated to hold the baby at first, but I asked them to, and they handled her so gently, like she was the most fragile thing in the world. The next morning, David finally called Emma. I could hear her yelling at him on the phone from across the room.
Are you serious right now, David? Your wife was in labor, and you were out drinking? If Mom and I hadn't been awake, who knows what would have happened? If you're actually sorry, get over here right now and apologize to Kate.
Emma really gave it to him, and it lifted a little of the fog from my heart.
Kate, I'm really sorry for my brother's behavior.
Oh, Emma, it's not your fault. Please, don't worry about it. Honestly, I'm so grateful you and Lily were here for me. I meant to call my own parents, but I accidentally dialed you. But thank goodness you came, and your mom, being a former midwife, I couldn't have asked for more. As I grabbed Emma's hand, her eyes welled up with tears, and she squeezed my hand back.
We're family, Kate. We're the same age, and from now on, let's support each other no matter what.
We turned to look at Emma's mom, who smiled at us with a serene, almost saint-like expression and nodded. I realized how lucky I was to have such a wonderful family. So many people struggle with their in-laws, but I was surrounded by warmth and love. Just as I was reflecting on this, the hospital room door burst open and David finally arrived. Emma and Lily's faces, once calm, suddenly hardened with fury.
David, I already told you over the phone, but seriously, what were you thinking?
Oh, come on. I've been doing all this crappy networking to support our family. You have no idea what it's like. I even told Kate to go to the hospital if anything happened, didn't I? I gave her the advice she needed. I was drunk. I couldn't drive. There was no point in me coming anyway. It's not like I could have done anything.
Was he really saying this? If he was, it wasn't just disappointment I felt anymore. It was something much deeper. Emma, Lily, and David started arguing, and things were getting out of control. A nurse came in to check on me and the baby, and she intervened to stop the fight. A week passed quickly, and both the baby and I were discharged from the hospital in good health. David, however, was grumpy and irritable throughout the entire process.
They won't stop nagging me. It's my business, not theirs. This is between me and Kate. Why do they think they can butt in? That's why I hate Mom and Emma.
He slammed the car door after buckling our daughter into her car seat. David, stop. Just because you're upset doesn't mean you can take it out on our daughter. David's mood worsened even more, and the drive home was filled with tension. By the way, what about this month's household expenses? Our daughter's newborn expenses were adding up, and I realized that David hadn't given me any money for the upcoming month.
Do it yourself. Why should I have to pay for your expenses?
I was stunned. I had quit my job to be a stay-at-home mom at David's insistence. As a stay-at-home mom, I had no income. How was I supposed to cover our living expenses? Sure, I could work if I had to, but what about our newborn daughter? How could she provide for herself? She's entirely dependent on us for her survival. David's attitude had completely changed since our daughter was born. No matter how much I tried to reason with him, he wouldn't budge, and I had to dip into my savings to cover groceries and necessities. I couldn't even enroll my daughter in daycare yet, and the good ones in our area were already full. I could have gone with a sketchier option, but I couldn't bring myself to leave my daughter in a place like that. The non-certified daycares were much more expensive, and even though I looked around, I couldn't find an affordable option. What am I supposed to do? As I got to know David's true nature after childbirth, my thoughts darkened with despair. When my daughter turned 3 months old, I went out for lunch with Emma to clear my mind. Just yesterday, I was trying to nap, and David yelled at me, saying,
Hey, the baby's crying.
Ah, that's awful. Does he even realize how sleep-deprived you are? It's his child, too. He should help.
Emma always supported me and listened to my complaints. Even though it didn't solve the root of the problem, venting to someone who understood kept me sane. Directly confronting David had got me nowhere, so I had stopped trying. After sharing my frustrations with Emma, I finally started to feel a little better.
Oh, by the way, how's Sarah doing?
When Emma mentioned my sister's name out of the blue, my heart skipped a beat. Since that day at my parents' house, I hadn't seen or spoken to Sarah. I was sure she'd heard about my daughter's birth through our parents, and she hadn't reached out to me. Why do you ask about Sarah? Emma shrugged and looked away.
I just ran into her recently, that's all. You know, it's tough having siblings with such twisted personalities.
We both shared a small laugh, acknowledging the complexities of our families. A few days later, I took my daughter for her 3-month checkup and vaccines. Normally, I'd drive to her pediatrician, but they were on vacation, so I decided to take her to a nearby clinic that had just opened. It was a beautiful day, and my daughter was peacefully dozing in her stroller. I felt a rare sense of calm as I walked, a welcome change from the constant tension at home. David still complained a lot, but he occasionally helped with our daughter, albeit reluctantly. I wasn't sure if we had a future together, but for now, I told myself to be patient. As I approached the clinic, I saw David coming out of the entrance. What's he doing here? I was shocked. David was supposed to be at work, but there he was, wearing casual clothes and holding a baby. He could barely tolerate holding our daughter for a few minutes, yet here he was, cradling this child with the tenderness of a father. A cold chill ran down my spine, and before I could stop myself, I called out to him. What are you doing? David flinched as if startled by my voice. I had noticed lately that David was sneaking out more often, and now I understood why. The baby he was holding was at the center of it all. Whose child is this? David hesitated, but then his demeanor shifted to one of defiance.
This is my son. Isn't he adorable? I've always wanted a boy, but you just had to go and give me a girl. I didn't want to divorce you while our daughter was still so young, but now that you know, we can get this over with. Let's get a divorce.
A shock ran through my body. It wasn't the fact that David was asking for a divorce that stunned me. It was the fact that he, the one who had hurt me, was saying it so casually. The smoldering anger I had kept buried deep inside began to flare up. Fine, I agreed to the divorce, but do you even realize what you've done?
Oh, come on, what? You want alimony or something? Ugh, you're so greedy. But whatever, if it's just a few $1,000s, I can pay that to get rid of you.
That's all I needed. I walked right past him and into the clinic.
David, are we still on for lunch after this? Oh, hi, Kate. What a surprise.
My sister Sarah walked up, casually greeting David by his first name as if nothing was wrong. It all clicked in that moment. David and Sarah were having an affair, and the baby in David's arms was theirs. The baby looked to be about 6 months old, slightly older than my daughter. David had grown cool toward me during my pregnancy, and now I understood why. Oh, so this is what's been going on. I finally get what you meant, Sarah, when you said you wouldn't steal my child. You never said you wouldn't steal my husband. You've been after him all along. My voice was eerily calm as I spoke, but inside, I was burning with fury.
Of course. Your happiness has always belonged to me, Kate. I couldn't let you be the only one to have it. I've always been ahead of you, and I always will be. I don't even care about kids, but I do love my son. Isn't that the real answer here?
The way she said it, like it was all so obvious, left me speechless. Any anger I had was quickly fading, replaced by a hollow feeling inside.
Sarah's right, Kate. You're not the kind of person who deserves to be happy. Sarah should have everything. She's your older sister. You should give it all to her. That's just how it is. It's the way of the world.
Sarah and David walked past me, laughing as they went, leaving me standing there numb. After they left, I felt a strange sense of calm. The divorce was inevitable, but what would I do after? I was a stay-at-home mom with no guarantee of finding a job. But maybe finally the universe was on my side.
Kate, can we talk?
Emma's voice was different this time, serious and steady. She called me out of the blue and said she had something important to discuss. That weekend, we gathered at Emma's parents' house.
Mom, Dad, I have something urgent to share.
As soon as Sarah walked into the living room, she froze, her eyes wide.
Oh, what's going on here?
David, who had also been called, stood there in shock as he took in the scene.
It's time for some answers.
Emma's voice cut through the tension like a knife, and I realized that we weren't alone. Several members of both families had gathered, Emma's parents, her uncle, and even some cousins. David slowly backed away, a nervous, trembling laugh escaping his lips.
Why is the mayor here?
The mayor was Emma's uncle, Lily's brother, who had a long family history of public service.
You didn't think I'd tell you, did you? My family has deep roots in public service, David. You should have known that before you crossed the line. You're just an employee at City Hall, but my uncle is basically your boss. And he's here to make sure justice is served.
David stood there, visibly shaking, realizing how deep in trouble he was.
Sarah, you know why you're here, right? And now, David, you get to explain yourself. What have you been doing with the child support money for Kate's daughter?
David's eyes darted nervously around the room as everyone stared at him. You've been the legal head of our household, David. I'm assuming you've been receiving the child benefits for our daughter. But you've been spending it on Sarah's baby, haven't you? David's eyes widened, but he said nothing. We're still technically married, which means Sarah has been receiving single-parent benefits, right? But that's fraud, David. You've both been claiming benefits while you live together and raise your baby like a family. Sarah didn't even flinch.
I don't see the problem. Lots of single moms have boyfriends who help them out. What's wrong with that?
The room buzzed with murmurs as the family members exchanged glances.
Actually, Sarah, that's illegal. Single-parent benefits are for those who truly have no help. If someone's supporting you, you're not eligible. It's called welfare fraud, and you can go to jail for it.
The word jail made both David and Sarah freeze. David finally broke his silence, his voice shaky.
We didn't know. We didn't mean to.
Emma's uncle, the mayor, stood up and fixed David with a hard stare.
Whether you knew or not, it doesn't matter. You've committed fraud, and as a public employee, you should have known better. This is a serious issue, and there will be consequences.
David dropped to his knees, begging for forgiveness.
It's all my fault. I told Sarah to do it because the benefits were higher this way. Please punish me, not her.
Even in his confession, David was still trying to protect Sarah, and I could feel my patience running thin. David, you'll face the consequences, not just for this fraud, but for everything else you've done. The affair, the lies, using our daughter's child benefits for another child. There's a lot you'll need to make up for. I've already consulted a lawyer, so you'll be receiving divorce papers and an official request for alimony and child support. You'll also need to repay the money you used. David's face went pale.
How am I supposed to pay all that?
You'll find a way. It's your responsibility now. For the first time in my life, I raised my voice. You don't get to escape this, David. You betrayed me as a husband, a father, and as a public servant. Whatever it takes, you'll pay. Borrow, work extra shifts, do whatever you have to. David looked like he might faint, but there was no sympathy left in me, and my catch in my eye gave me a reassuring nod. Then she threw some photos onto the table.
These are the proof of Sarah's infidelity. I was hired by a woman who suspected her husband was cheating, and guess what? Sarah was the other woman. I did some digging on my own, and it turns out Sarah has been seeing multiple men, not just David.
Sarah turned ghostly pale. Everyone in the room gasped. Emma's parents looked like they were going to collapse from shock. The rest of the family just shook their heads in disappointment. In that moment, Sarah's betrayal was laid bare for everyone to see. David, now realizing the depth of his mistake, turned to Sarah, his face full of panic.
Sarah? Is this true? Are you really cheating on me too? We need to get a DNA test done on the baby.
Sarah remained silent, her expression giving nothing away. But the fact she didn't deny it made the situation clear. The doubt about whether the baby was David's seemed to confirm that the child might not even be his.
I never thought my part-time private investigation skills would end up being so useful,
Emma muttered as David glared at her.
You're a private investigator? You're the most annoying sister ever.
David's final outburst only made things worse for him.
It's too late for that, David. Your actions have shown no remorse. You'll face the consequences.
David immediately straightened up, his back stiff as if trying to regain some dignity.
No, I'm truly sorry. I'll take responsibility.
But it was far too late. The punishment awaiting him wouldn't be lenient, especially considering the scandal involving public funds and fraud. After the interrogation, I learned that David confessed to encouraging Sarah to apply for single-parent benefits even though they were living together and raising a child. Because of this, David was stripped of his position at the city office and transferred to a different department. The news of the scandal spread quickly, and soon the shame and pressure became too much for David to bear. He eventually quit his job, leaving behind the stability he had once cherished. Our divorce was finalized before he lost his job, and he managed to pay back the money he owed me through various loans. Since then, he's been living alone in a rundown apartment, struggling to make ends meet with a night job as a traffic control worker. He's reportedly being berated by a younger supervisor, a far cry from the life he once led. Sarah faced a similar downfall. Once the fraud was exposed, she returned the money and avoided jail time, but one of her friends wasn't so lucky. That friend had been cheating the system for over a decade, and thanks to Sarah's confession, she was arrested and given a suspended sentence. The friend now holds a deep grudge against Sarah, who has since disappeared from sight, fearing revenge. Rumors say Sarah now works in a shady bar, far from her previous life of luxury. Her son's paternity remains unknown, but my parents have stepped in to help raise him, and I've come to love him just as I do my own daughter. I'm committed to raising both children with love and care, ensuring they grow up without bearing the burdens of their parents' mistakes. Emma and I remain close, and although she's no longer my sister-in-law, she and her mom have become like family to me. We even have plans to take a family trip to Hot Springs soon. My life has been full of ups and downs, but now, as I look around, I realize that I've found peace and happiness in the end.